Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. I am here with our illustrious producer, Nathan Yoder, our series co-host, Alyssa Catanzaro, the phenomenal, remarkable Alyssa. And then we are also here with a very special guest, Nick Trombley from 441 Ministries. And I think y'all are going to enjoy him. He went to college near me. Love that. So there we go. So we are in the middle of a series, Why Should I Volunteer? It's based off these last 2 years, what we've went through, knowing that, at some point it's important to get involved. And today's question, based on 441 Ministries, is this: why would I volunteer at a neighborhood nonprofit? Alyssa, what do you think about this topic?
Yeah, so I know a little bit more about 441 just through actually a couple of my friends volunteer there. So that's super cool. I love it. And I'm very excited to talk more with Nick just about what 441 does. Yikes. But yeah, I think it's just super important, especially now as I've grown up in Rochester, just taking care of Rochester or taking care of wherever you live is just beautiful and important. So.
Wow. That was, I love that. So anyways, Nick, we're here. So tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us how you got connected to 441 Ministries.
Yeah, so I guess first, as we're talking about volunteering and just being here at Browncroft, just want to thank you guys for the opportunity to be here, and thanks to all the many Browncroft volunteers who work with 441. It's great to just be part of this community. So thank you.
You said that this was your first time in this building, right?
First time in this building, yeah.
Wow.
And I didn't get lost. So you gave good directions, but it's
We tried.
a big building. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I grew up in Canandaigua, New York, and as Peter mentioned, went to college near him, which is Eastern University, down outside of Philadelphia. And during my freshman year of college, got really convicted about the background of my upbringing in Canandaigua and some folks in Rochester. Eastern University has a focus on faith, reason, and justice. And during our intro class, we were just looking at a bunch of justice issues, including some to deal with schooling, that just kind of juxtaposing schools kind of in closer proximity than Canandaigua, Rochester. But I was feeling like, man, my high school was like that really nice one that we're reading and talking about. And, folks in Rochester are growing up in high school like that. And these huge, just seems like different worlds. And so I kind of felt like I need to get involved somehow. So I reached out to some folks in my church, and through God's providence, got plugged in with 441, and thankfully they had a volunteer slot for me, and I was able to start volunteering that summer with the kids and the kids ministry and our farm stand, which was a partnership with FoodLink to bring in produce into the neighborhood. So fast forward about 3 years, I stayed involved with 441 and developed sort of a mentoring relationship with 441's founder, Chris Holdridge, who's now the pastor of New City Fellowship Church. And during my senior year of college, at my internship site, and I get an email newsletter from 441 saying that they're going to start this coffee shop, and that it's primarily an avenue to employ youth in the neighborhood. And I just kind of, my jaw dropped. I texted Chris right away, and I was like, I want to be involved with this, because simultaneously I'm studying economic development, getting really passionate about utilizing business to create change in impoverished neighborhoods, and just loving coffee. And so it's like, wow, these things are happening together in the neighborhood that I want to be part of working in when I graduate. So thankfully there was an employment opportunity for me there, and I became the assistant director of the New City Cafe in January 2017. Fast forward a few more years, I became the director, and then just 3-4 months ago became the executive director of all of 441 Ministries.
Awesome. So good. Yeah, so what does 441 do? I mean, you've already touched on pieces of it, but I know that it's a pretty wide variety of things. But yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, I think 441 has two kind of faces. There's an informal and a formal side of the work that we do. And I'll start with the informal because that's really how 441 started. The families that sort of started 441 like to say that the formal nonprofit kind of happened by accident. They initially moved into the Beechwood neighborhood about 15 years ago with the desire to just be good neighbors. They were really convicted by the Christian call to serve the poor and were particularly inclined toward John Perkins' philosophy of this kind of ministry with the Christian Community Development Association, which starts with relocation. So saying if you want to minister to these folks, it's best if you're living in community with them. So some families relocated to the Beechwood neighborhood, which is one of Rochester's poorest and most underserved neighborhoods, and they just started kind of grassroots ministry, getting to know their neighbors, having backyard barbecues, doing games with kids in the park, all sorts of just the everyday stuff of life, but in the context of cross-cultural relationships with the desire to just see broken relationships restored. So that was happening for a while, and then through God's providence, some really cool stories that maybe we'll save for another day. We ended up with a building. Just shout out to Grace Church for making that happen. And so we ended up having this building and kind of went from just being this grassroots ministry to like, we have 6 apartment units now, and we have ministry space, and we have, this is a nonprofit. So formally got registered as a nonprofit and named 441 Ministries based on our street address, 441 Parcells Ave, and started some more formal programming. So programs that we have now include affordable housing. We have 9 different apartment units in the neighborhood that we are maintaining to a high level and trying to upgrade while keeping them below market rate. We have job training and development primarily at this time through the New City Cafe, which again was planted to create jobs for teens and young adults in our community. We've got kids and teen programs and mentoring. We have some avenues toward bringing in healthy food into the neighborhood, including partnership with FoodLink's Curbside Market, a community garden. What else we do? We do a lot of stuff, but all of it is kind of this. Our mission statement is to bring hope, healing, and holistic development to the Beechwood neighborhood. So we are really trying to do all these different programming, meet people wherever they're at in every phase of life in our community, and have programs and relationships that serve them.
I kind of want to back up to your personal story because I love Eastern University, good neighbors. So there's an individual named Shane Claiborne who's connected to them, part of the Simple Way, and I think I got that right. But, basically he's kind of provided this model, which is what you talked about, which is we're not just going to live outside of where we want to minister, but we're going to be missional and actually live and serve that place. So I guess I'm kind of curious from your perspective. We're going to do a lot of podcasts here that, hey, you know what? I'm going to live in Webster. I'm going to live in the burbs, but I'll go serve in the urban ministry. And you made the conscious decision to say, no, if I want to make a difference, I'm going to have to live there. How is Eastern a part of that? Just bring us through your thought process with that.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated that focus at Eastern. I got to participate in the homeless ministry that Shane kind of helped start, and Shane was definitely a big inspiration. But this idea of these ideas seemed really coupled of intentional community and living among the poor, and there's just that kind of undergirding idea within kind of the ethos of Eastern, I think, and definitely in particular within our economic development major. Sometimes when I tell people I was an economic development major, they think I have like great knowledge of all these charts and can speak to the NPR's Planet Money podcast or whatever. But really, it was more of a focus on how do we utilize business as a tool within the context of community development among the poor, and this idea that it should happen in the context of intentional community was just a big part of that. So, sorry, your question: how did I make that call?
Well, yeah.
Or
How did you make? Because
to me?
there might be a few listeners that make that decision, that say, you know what, if I'm really going to make a difference in this polarized climate, I'm going to have to make a huge change. So, I mean, just walk people through.
Yeah, I don't claim to to be an expert on that, but I think, I think there's a large degree to which we all recognize these divisions in our society, and we want to see healing happen, and we want to engage in cross-cultural relationships. But just practically, the majority culture needs to be the one to bend toward the minority culture, or the rich need to bend toward the poor, because let's say we wanted to do the same thing that we're doing at 441 in Pittsford, nothing against Pittsford, but our neighbors in Beechwood could not move to Pittsford.
Right.
They could not afford housing there, whereas we could afford housing in Beechwood. So I think just practically speaking, it's a necessary tool toward those relationships. Not in every context, not to say that the only way cross-cultural relationships can come about is through relocation, but it's a powerful tool to get there and to really know what people are experiencing. All of us put on our best face when we've got visitors coming over, and so sometimes organizations that go into poorer communities but leave at 5 o'clock probably don't know what's really facing the folks in that community. But when you live there and your kids are playing with their kids and your backyards bump up against each other, and you both heard the car blasting music at 3 a.m. last night and are struggling to sleep, that's when you start to say, okay, I see what you're experiencing, I feel it, and you know that I'm not going anywhere. Like I put down roots here, so you can be vulnerable with me as I'm vulnerable with you. And I think that just breaks down so many barriers in ways that that just are, physical divides can't break down the same barriers.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's so cool. Just on a trusting level. Like, yeah, there is something so deep about actually, forming these roots in a place instead of just being like, okay, see ya. It was fun to hang out. Yeah, I love it so much. How, when you first started working with 441 and, even planning to move into the Beechwood neighborhood, how did people react to that? I'm thinking parents or your friends, what did they think when you're like, I'm going to move here into an area that, probably isn't the safest for all the time or whatever, generalizing. But yeah, how did people react to that?
Yeah, my parents are probably a good example. I'm sure they'll be listening. So thank you for all your support, Mom and Dad.
Well, all 6 of our parents are going to listen, so it's all good.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, thankful to have supportive parents. But yeah, they were nervous. There was no shortage of conversations with when we would have Chris and Alicia Holdridge over for dinner. My parents would kind of grill them on all right, is this safe? Are there alternatives? North Winton Village is right across Culver. How about they just live there and is that effective? And so some, I think, genuine good kind of concerns, but also tons of support. Thankfully, being just connected to the 441 and New City Fellowship community, which I guess I should probably mention. New City Fellowship is our neighborhood church plant, which kind of works in tandem with 441. I don't think we could be nearly as effective as an organization without the local church. So that's a big part of what we do. And Chris is the pastor there. but it's basically a group of people that are all kind of sharing the same vision and doing things together. So generally, when I just think of friends and an overall community, just lots of support and encouragement to come and join. But yeah, parents and probably a few others, or like my grandpa. Every time there's a shooting on Parcells, he's always calling me and is thinking that I'm in the midst of it.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, that's a great question, Alyssa. I guess it's interesting from your parents' side. You're married, so how did you meet your wife, and what did it look like to have this conversation? I mean, where were both of you on this conversation of? And I'm less concerned about living, like, so I think about this, my wife, my grandma, rest her soul, she's like, my grandson's going to be a pastor. And my wife's like, and she's a mental health counselor. She's like, that's probably projection. And I was like, no, I really do want to become a pastor. Like, so we had that. So, I mean, bring us into that relationship. Were you always on the same page, or just, share with us that.
Yeah. So I met my wife, Patience, at Eastern University, and she grew up in New Jersey. So coming up here to my territory was I guess she always knew it was part of the package, because by the time we started dating, I was already infatuated with 441 and felt God calling me to be part of the work that was happening there. I didn't know it would happen formally. I didn't know I'd be actually working for 441, but I felt a call to live in the community there and be part of the work. So pretty soon after we started dating, she kind of knew, like, if this is it. And in all fairness, I wanted to be open to that, not being the case, to saying, this isn't just her following me, but like, where is God calling us together? And if I truly feel deeply called to this, that can only be affirmed if she also feels called to it. So yeah, it was pretty intentional about her making trips up here and visiting folks connected to 441 and New City Fellowship, and she had the same background, same major, economic development. So she was really inclined toward these ideas of intentional community and living among the poor. So it was a little bit of it was I would say a relatively smooth transition. But we did initially, when we got married, we ended up living not within the Beechwood neighborhood, but we're still living in Rochester, and that was an interesting time also, because one of the things that I think I was confronted with two things within that time. The first was, when getting married, I had to learn that my first ministry is to my wife, and I need to prioritize that over whatever my work, my formal job ministry might be. And within that process, we felt compelled to live somewhere else initially, and super thankful for the grace of the church and folks at 441 that were encouraging us to move into the neighborhood, but said, if God's not calling you to, then he's not calling you to. And that also helped me. I have a predisposition to be probably somewhat rigid and judgmental, and I'm thankful for God breaking down my heart in that way. And I think if I initially moved into the Beechwood neighborhood, I wouldn't have as much grace for people that choose to be part of our work but don't live in the neighborhood. And there's a lot of folks that are part of our church, are part of 441, who don't live in the neighborhood. And I think I would have been a little bit more rigid if I just did it from the beginning. But I'm glad that I didn't, and just got to experience those dynamics and the grace of others, so that I can now understand, I think, where people are coming from a little bit more.
I mean, you brought it up. How do you manage that tension? So if I started serving 441 ministry, God could always call me to the Beechwood neighborhood, but most likely I'd probably stay in the Webster Penfield area. How do you manage with volunteers, with people that have moved there? I mean, what are some landmines, or even, you don't even have to go negative, but how do you help kind of people be together as opposed to being rigid, as you said?
Yeah, I think there's a real dynamic that anyone who deeply gets involved with 441 and New City Fellowship should be asking themselves, should I move into the neighborhood? I think that's that's got to be part of the package. So I don't think we would want to say like, come get really involved, serve in this high level position, or like become a member of our church without even considering this, and kind of making it the default. Like, I think, you should move here, and only not move here if you feel God calling you not to move here, like so that the default option is almost different. Whereas I think we usually approach those questions of like, I'm only going to move to the hard area if I feel like God is really calling me there. But maybe I and I'd love some, pastoral, unpacking of biblical passages to really wrestle with the overall Christian context of this. But I do think that God is often calling people away from the familiar and the comfortable and into the difficult areas. So anyway, I think that's kind of something that I would want everyone who's getting involved with our organization to wrestle with. But again, not in like a legalism way, almost like hey, you seem to really care about our neighbors here, and you seem to really want to build relationships with them. The best way to do that's going to be to live here, yeah. And to kind of help folks see like, oh yeah, no, this is what I want to do, and the fruits of that. Like for me, moving into the neighborhood has been so great for me, and not that I want to think about this in terms of just my own kind of what I've gotten out of this or something, but there's the richness of relationships. I could not have imagined how great it would be living in the neighborhood. So I think folks who are interested in kind of urban community development should just really be asking themselves that, and should kind of be considering the ways that it is even more fulfilling what their own kind of desires are as they get passionate about serving a community like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've kind of touched on serving a little bit, explaining, how your ministry works, but I just want to talk about, volunteering is what this whole podcast series is about. So what does volunteering look like to you? And like, how would you define it? And also, like, what kinds of volunteers does 441 need or use now? But
yeah, it's been fun kind of reflecting on our volunteers in preparation for this, because I almost didn't realize just how many volunteers we have. And so when I was also trying to come up with just like a quick definition of volunteer. So I pretty much just, my definition that I've been contemplating is someone doing a job that someone could get paid for, but doing it for free, essentially, is how I'm thinking of volunteering. There's probably a better definition out there, but Wikipedia's wasn't that great either. So
we'll take it.
Yeah.
It sounds somewhat spiritual, so there you go.
So our volunteers, range from, my favorite volunteers are those that pick up our donuts and bagels every morning so that I don't have to wake up at 6 every morning to do that. We've got folks that are doing like simple things like that, just picking up supplies for our cafe. And then we've got folks that are helping out with our social media pages, folks that are helping serve on our development committee and raise funds for 441. All of our board members are volunteers. Teen mentors, there's this huge kind of spectrum of folks that volunteer for 441.
Wow. Well, so I think even why we want to have that definition is, realizing the current events, realizing what's happening this year. Like, there's a time to learn, there's a time to listen, and then there's a time to, hey, you know what? I want to be part of the solution. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, this last year, 2020, 2021, here we are. Why is it important for people to volunteer, specifically in a neighborhood or even in their neighborhood? There could be some people that live in Beechwood that are listening to this podcast and all, I didn't know 441 was here. So I guess I'd be curious kind of how you see this ministry and opportunity fulfilling something that helps connect people together.
Yeah, I think it's important to build cross-cultural relationships, and I think it's important to volunteer or serve in this context insofar as it accomplishes that. And also I think there are times when it happens maybe not through volunteering. So when I think about this, the context that you kind of put us in 2020, we've seen just how divided we are as a country, but also I think that just misunderstandings and mistrust, and that relationships are the key to that, to fixing that. I think a lot of folks I talk to just really have no idea kind of the life situation of folks living in poverty in Rochester, and so once you start getting to know people, you understand these whole spectrums a lot better. And so I think engaging in cross-cultural relationships is extremely important to that end. How that fits in with volunteering it's interesting. I think because as we've been exploring, the heart of what we're doing at 441 is for deep, long-lasting, meaningful relationships. So we want folks to experience that, and to, I guess, really to have the right heart when you're coming into it. And I think something that's so important is being a student. And I'm still trying to be a student of our neighborhood and the experiences of my neighbors. And I think sometimes volunteering can come in, folks can say, I really want to make a difference, but really the first step is probably just to come in and to be a student, and and only through kind of knowing a situation can you potentially get involved in service and make a difference. Or maybe that it might not, you realize through that process that, okay, this isn't for me. Kind of rambling right now as I'm working through these tensions of
No, I think what you're doing though is kind of setting, because I mean we're talking a lot about tensions during this series, and even when Alyssa and I did our first episode about this, and we were just talking about you don't want to come in and try to be the savior.
Mm-hmm.
You want to come in and serve. And even just the nature of a neighborhood ministry, it sounds like a multiplication of time. If I live outside that neighborhood, there's a certain level that I have to understand I just don't get.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to your 3 a.m. in the morning. And so, I think even my concern as a pastor is, I see these issues, and you pick any person or just group of people, and it's like, I don't know this person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, I don't know how to help you, except, because not everybody wants to be like a project or so it's having some of these
Mm-hmm.
conversations and volunteering opportunities that I kind of feel like is just so important. And, I'd be curious, Alyssa, and Nick, even just go to New City Cafe once a week and buy a cup of coffee. That's as simple, you don't have to call Nick, I don't know. How do you kind of walk through that, Alyssa, just as you're helping people find volunteering opportunities like 441?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I actually am distracted now because I had a hot chocolate from New City Cafe, and then I thought about it for weeks after. It was so good. It was just so good. So, I'm sorry. I'm distracted now. But can you repeat your question?
No. So, I guess there's kind of levels to this. Ideally, what you're saying is move into the neighborhood. Even with Alyssa, what you're dealing with is, you might go to another country, but the vast majority, at least in this church, maybe most of our listeners, they're not going to go. So, how do you help people navigate that tension and just walk them through it? Hot chocolate. Let's go.
Well, I think it's interesting because at least so coming from like a missions perspective of, we'll just say short term, because long term missions is essentially 441 just plugged somewhere else. Yeah, but so for short term, it's easier to just, I mean, you prepare and whatever, and then you go, you serve for a week, and then you come back, and then life just sort of like goes back to normal. I mean, hopefully you're changed in some kind of way that you make changes in your everyday life, but a lot of the time, like, you're taken out of that service opportunity. Like, you're taken out of the extreme situation that you were in, the poverty that you've seen, and now you're back in, you know, your cozy house in Penfield. So it's easy to like be affected, but then also to just like, okay, well, I'm going back to normal life. But yeah, so crossing the lines that divide us, really, like moving to the Beechwood area sounds like that's a commitment. So that's a big commitment. Going to New City Cafe to get a hot chocolate is not a commitment. I mean, it's delicious and it does, you know, benefit the ministry. But yeah, like how, I don't know. It's almost like, sorry, I've got a lot of thoughts in my head now because I'm thinking like to cross the boundaries or cross the lines, like how do you do that? Like, in a way, I don't know. I think it's easy to just be like, I don't know. It's easier to just buy something from their cafe or just donate online or something. Like, how do you actually like get in there?
Yeah.
It sounds like you're wrestling with this, so I'd love to hear.
Same. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of our hopes for New City Cafe, and we're trying to figure this out, but is to be an intersectional place. So my hope would be that if someone made that kind of commitment that you sort of put forward, like just swing by once a week, that they would do so with kind of like an openness of whoever they might meet when they come in, and hopefully through that, you know, it might not first 2 times you come, you might be the only one sitting in our seating area for a little bit. You might not, or you might not meet any new folks from the neighborhood, but let's say you do, and just being open to that relationship, I think we're hoping to create a space where you would meet people who you would never otherwise meet, and we want it to be this intersectional, folks from everywhere are gathering, primarily, hopefully our target's always 50% from the neighborhood. So hopefully if you come, you're going to get to know some folks from the neighborhood, and that could build these relationships. I see so many grassroots relationships that have started that way, that, simple things like a lot of our neighbors don't have cars but need to get groceries. And then you see a relationship that developed from someone who was just coming with an open mind and open heart into the cafe, gets to know someone, and a month later they're driving them around the city, doing various stuff for them, or maybe helping out with some childcare. And that's again that they're coming in open mind, getting to know this person, and not necessarily like, I'd hate for us to kind of fill the cafe with people that are waiting for neighborhood folks to come in and be like, how can I help you?
Right.
But again, so the idea would be like, I just want to build a relationship. And I think when we are doing that, we're also, something I was touching on earlier is we end up being also served by folks. And there's, you asked me for my definition of volunteer, which I prepared was like more clean cut. My definition of service is sort of like, when I think of service, I think of this far more blurred line that like true service, I don't know where like me serving you stops and you serving me begins. And we're just kind of like, oh, we're just serving or living, or like we're just in relationship. And I think that's what that's the best. That's what I love seeing through the grassroots relational ministry work at 441. And I think, and
well, go ahead, Alyssa.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that's where, like you had mentioned, the savior aspect, when you go in to be like, I can see that this person is materialistically poorer than I am. Like, it's so easy to walk in and be like, what can I do for you? I'm super great and I'm very helpful. And I'd love to, pour out all the things that I have. So yeah, I just think that's such a cool way to think about like the blurred line of serving, because if you treat people like actual people and not based on, and we've talked about like the economic levels and what, they're deeper than just like the financial piece. But yeah, just really wanting to get to know people just because they're humans. Like, I love it.
Well, and I think that that's huge. I'm going to go super nerdy on you because you brought it up. So your degree is in economic development and even kind of what Alyssa's saying. So I also kind of see like this could be a problem. All of a sudden, gentrification in the Beechwood neighborhood. And so I guess from your experience and in this ministry, what you don't want is people from the suburbs moving to this neighborhood ministry and all of a sudden the housing prices go up and things like, so I guess in your kind of, I'm going to put your expert hat on, how do you, because that's been a big problem. Like, how do you kind of walk through that knowing that, hey, we're trying to be a transitional place, but we want to keep the neighborhood and yeah.
Yeah, it's incredibly complicated, because neighborhoods are not sort of stagnant things. Sometimes we think, like the point at which when I moved in, this is what the neighborhood was like, and and all these changes have happened, but really the neighborhoods are changing all of the time. And I think when we enter a neighborhood like Beechwood, some of the work that we want to do is, keep people safer, create jobs, create better housing. But all of those things inevitably make the neighborhood more attractive and then turn around and make housing prices rise as demand to live in the neighborhood increases. So I think housing is key. Keeping affordable housing in the neighborhood is important. So that's has been a pillar of 441, but I think it's becoming an even bigger focus for us. And we've got some great community partners like the City Roots Community Land Trust that's doing more work to ensure that there's affordable housing in the city. Because, housing prices determine so much. So there's not a simple answer.
Well, and then, my follow-up question to you is help people understand what you're doing. Like, so what, you started a coffee shop. Like, I'm going to pick on myself. Every millennial, their dream is to start a coffee shop. Why are you worried about starting a coffee shop? Why, the other week I brought lunch to a few people that were working on the building. I'll let you fill in the blank to what that building was, just in case am I allowed to say it?
Yeah, sure.
It's a coffee roastery, Yeah. So why is all of this so important? And, just help our listeners understand, because maybe there might even be a volunteer opportunity in that. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. So, within the building that we purchased, there's 2 storefronts and 6 apartments at the kind of the flagship location of 441. And about 5-6 years ago, the business that was in the one storefront went out of business. So we had been kind of operating the first storefront as general ministry space, kids, teen gatherings, community meals, Narcotics Anonymous meetings, things like that. And then when the other business went out of business, and we said, okay, we've got this storefront, what are we going to do with it? We were really motivated by the teens in our neighborhood, and we had these programs, kids ministry, teen ministry. But we noticed, as kids are getting older, we aren't able to kind of retain them in the ways that we would like to, and I think we're pretty familiar with the situation of the Rochester City School District, just ginormous rates of kids that don't finish high school. And we're just actually seeing through, our windows, kids that used to be part of our programs now caught up in life on the streets. And we said, okay, we need to create something that's going to impact that particular situation. And so the idea of the coffee shop was we got to create some jobs for young people in our neighborhood. And time again, even just now when I'm walking around the neighborhood talking to people, you hear from a lot of young folks how badly they want jobs in the neighborhood, stuff that they can walk to, because transportation is it's a totally different game in the city. Like most 20-year-olds in our neighborhood that I know don't have their driver's license yet, whereas when I was 17, which was probably even late in some ways, like in the suburbs, I feel like you turn 16, you get that permit, you get everything lined up. Hopefully your parents are going to share a car with you or even give you a car, right? And it's just, you're driving right away, and that's just not the case in the city. So families relying on public transportation, and for a teenager in Rochester to get home from school, jump on a bus, head out to Irondequoit, navigate, work for a few hours, navigate the bus system and get home. It's just, it's nuts. So it's just not super realistic for young people in our community to get jobs very easily. So we're, again, through being in relationship and listening to the needs of our neighbors, especially the teenagers, we realized, okay, we got to create some jobs for young people in the neighborhood. And the idea of the coffee shop was just coffee shops are great gathering places. And so we wanted it to be an open space where people can just kind of come and hang out and get to know one another. And it's evolved a lot over the years. And I think hopefully we're better than we've ever been. But one of our desires is to create kind of a high quality coffee shop experience, the best hot chocolate you've ever had, but then to do it at prices that are affordable to our community. So our small coffee is just $1, and everything is, we have pretty thin profit margins. So we do that to in sort of like a cross-cultural ministry way of taking something that's been sort of part of majority culture experience and say, to our neighbors, hey, you deserve this also. We love this, and we think you're going to love this. And so
wow,
that's the picture, I guess.
Yeah. So I know where you're located in that big, it's like a painted square. I like that the street is like colorful. So how do people, do people just stumble upon 441, or do you advertise in the Beechwood neighborhood? How do you get people? That's not
carrier
that's not
pigeons,
correct. Yeah. How do you attract people to 441 to create relationships, to serve them in certain ways? But how do people find 441?
Through my involvement with the ministry, most of what we've done has been pretty much on a grassroots level. I haven't been a part of something that was kind of an intentional sort of walking around, knocking on doors and just getting new folks involved. And I think that's something we could and probably should do at some point. I think even though the organization is somewhat old, I don't know, it's I think formally started in 2012. I think we're still all of our programs are really getting refined, and we're still learning, which is, absolutely, I think, a key to what we're doing. So I think we've developed a lot of great relationships with families in our community, and word spreads well. And our kids ministry, for example, a new family moves into Parcells within a quarter-mile radius of us, and they just end up knowing about it and hear about it from other kids. And we've definitely got great community partners, like folks at School 33 know about us, and East High and Community Place, and all these different kind of community partners. So I think word primarily spreads on a grassroots level, but Beechwood is a huge neighborhood, and there are so many people, and has the highest percentage of kids of any neighborhood in Rochester. Oh, wow. And so I'd almost love to plant 5 more 441s on different corners all throughout the neighborhood, because there are tons of kids who probably have never heard of 441, and we would love to serve them also and to have programs that are helping them with everything. And
Cool.
Well, before we'll do two final questions. This has been super informative. So I want you to think 441 and then big, some of our listeners are from Portland. They might be from Atlanta or Chicago, wherever they're from. There isn't a 441 there yet, I should say. But, when you're thinking about a neighborhood ministry and you're thinking about volunteering, you've talked about just a lot of the tensions, and we had a previous phone call. What are you looking for with a volunteer? What are the opportunities? Is it something that's super specific, or is it just we want you to be available? But, how would people get involved?
Yeah. In Atlanta, there's a FCS Ministries. Gotta just do a shout out to. We look to them for a lot of. They do some great work. So it's. Anyway.
What's
FCS?
What does that stand for?
I should know this, and I don't. So I can.
We'll Google it later. Keep going.
Yeah. There's. But yeah. What are we looking for in a volunteer? I think. Looking for someone who's passionate about the work. If you're not passionate about urban ministry, what are you passionate about? I think in college, actually Shane Claiborne, I think during our first chapel services, freshmen gave an analogy talking about we're all trying to figure out what we're going to major in, and at Christian schools, a lot of people are like, "What is God? What are you calling me to?" Hoping that you open up your Bible and there's my science textbook is actually in here. I guess I should be a biology major. But really, he said, think about where your skills and passions meet the needs of the world, and that's what you should do. And so I think sometimes we need some prompting and whatnot. But yeah, if your skills and passions are in space of urban ministry, and there's this huge need within the world, or maybe it's kids specifically, or maybe it's food. There are so many aspects to community development in an impoverished urban neighborhood. So I think pressing into that and having that meet the needs of the community, then go press in there. And again, if someone is just feeling generally convicted about wanting to volunteer, but it's not really aligned with an organization, there's probably something else that you are passionate about, and so God puts those passions in us, so we should pursue those. So anyway, kind of long explanation, but I do want volunteers who are I love what you're doing, and I want to be part of it. And then from that also just a desire to learn more. I think if you're hopefully as you're passionate about something, you're recognizing also that there's more for you to learn and to grow. So come alongside us, learn from us and with us, and put those passions that God's given you to work.
Man, that's a great place to close with our last question, which is, what does Jesus have to say about this topic? And so Alyssa and I will share our thoughts of what we learned, and then you can clean up any heresy or anything we got wrong. So Alyssa, who do you want to go first?
You can go first.
Oh, wow. So as I was thinking about this interview, I came back to the often quoted, I think it's Tip O'Neill, all politics is local. And it got me thinking, all theology is local. Now, I want to kind of unpack that in a way that, as someone with a degree to study the Bible, we ask three questions. What does it first mean? What did the passage first mean to the original hearers? What are the timeless truths? And then what does it mean for us today? And in some ways, we as Christians have tried to recapture all theology is local to Jerusalem, Judea, but we have to also just be students not only of the ancient times, but of where we are right now. And so no matter, if you never moved to an urban area, you still have to do the local theology. Jesus lived in a time in a specific place, and he knew those issues. He knew about Nazareth, he knew about Jerusalem, and he spoke to them in such a way that he was a student of culture. And so as I think about what we're talking about today, yes, you should be involved in your community, but your community isn't just your neighborhood you live in, it's also the metropolitan city that you live by. So when people ask me where I'm from, I say I'm from Rochester. Sure, my address says Rochester, but technically I'm not in the city of Rochester, which means this: if I'm proud to call it that, I should be caring about my neighborhood, and that extends more. And you might leave this podcast thinking, is Peter telling us to move to the city, or is Nick telling us to? And it's like, well, if God tells you to, and if you're passionate about it, then I like the way you put it. We're going to assume that until God closes a door. But that doesn't mean that the same principles of learning about your community and neighborhood and volunteering and being a part of that, that's just a standard way that Jesus calls us to live, and that's the way he lived. So I don't know, Alyssa.
Yeah.
I got going.
I liked that. That was good. Yeah, and I guess so what I was just thinking with this question, so I mean, everything about 441 is relationship building. So much of it, I mean, all the ministries that you do, everything comes down to relationships and caring about one another. And obviously that is all over the Bible, and Jesus, calls you to love people. But something that stuck out was just the verse about encourage each other and build each other up. And I just think that is that's 441, and that's what being in a relationship means. And I love the holistic piece of 441. Obviously there are some needs that need to be met, whether that's food or education. It's just part of life, and that's there. But then the spiritual piece of okay, but where are you with Jesus? And now that we've got a friendship happening, we can have real conversations about things that matter. But yeah, and then you can so just the holistic piece of truly encouraging people and building them up and treating them like humans and moving into their space, just being together, I just think is really beautiful. And yeah, just something that as Christians we're called to love one another and to truly take care of each other. And I just think it's if you're being called to move into a neighborhood that's way different than the way that you grew up or where you're currently living, do it until God tells you not to. I love that. Just because we're supposed to encourage each other and just truly take care of each other. So,
love it.
Yeah.
Nick, fix whatever we broke.
Yeah, that was good. I do strongly believe that the kind of foundational principles of 441 that we're built upon are truly gospel centered. And so as I've been thinking about, or I've been reading through one of John Perkins' book, just about the general ministry philosophy of the CCDA, and it has these 3 R's, the relocation, and a big part of that idea is that thank God Jesus didn't commute back and forth to heaven. He came and he dwelt among the people. And so there's this biblical idea of relocation that we can have our practical application. And then there's reconciliation, and we see in the scriptures that all of creation is longing for a right relationship with God. And God uses us as his ambassadors here on earth to reconcile broken relationships, both broken relationships with one another and broken relationships with God. So that's a foundational scriptural teaching. And then the final R in the CCDA's handbook, I guess, is redistribution, and that is primarily viewed through the context of building up indigenous leaders. And there's economic principles of that, and there's relational principles, but this idea that we are called to equip one another, which I think we see as foundational in the life of Christ. So I think that's some of scratching the surface of what the Bible has to say about it, but I definitely appreciate pastoral input there. Mostly, so thank you.
I think what you're saying is where there's Christians, we should see evidence of the gospel at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, man, I love it. I love it. Nick, thanks for joining us. So if you don't live in Rochester, find, I always mess it up. It's CCDA.
Yeah, Christian Community Development Association, which, I should also add that we, some of the initial principles that they put out are stuff that 441 is built on, and since then, we don't perfectly align with them, so I don't want to say that that's not necessarily the benchmark, but John Perkins is the benchmark.
So if you don't live in Rochester, there's probably a 441 near you. Support them. You can go to newcitycafe.org or .com. newcityroc.com. Love it. And then if you're local to Rochester, we want to bless New City, so I want to challenge like 3,000 of you to go buy some coffee there. So do it after this episode comes out. And make sure when you go there, just say, hey, I heard about you on Why God Why. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Look at that. I love it. So find us at whygodwhypodcast.com. The best way to get information is to subscribe to our email. We send you all the episodes and make sure you connect from there. Nick, thanks for joining us. Alyssa, this was fun.
Yeah,
I can't wait
so
for more.
fun.
We have some more coming up. So have a wonderful day.